Lonely rancher posted for a farmhand, but a girl with no shoes arrived and stayed forever. Wyoming Territory, winter, 1871. The wind screamed low across the empty plains, dragging curls of snow through brittle brush and over sagging fence posts. The sky was a pale wash of steel. In the distance, the mountains looked like frozen bones. Randy Rowe pulled his coat tight around him and stepped out onto the porch of his ranch house, his boots crunching ice. A pale sun hovered like a secret behind gray clouds, offering no warmth. He was 32, with the lean, sharp look of a man used to losing more than he gained. 4 years ago, the war had taken his youth. That same autumn, childbirth took his wife. Since then, silence had been his closest companion. The ranch kept going only because he did. Horses needed feeding, fences needed fixing, grief did not stop the snow, and hunger did not care about sorrow. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, wide and wind-battered, much like the heart inside his chest. He barely spoke these days, save for the occasional trip into town for feed or salt or the rare letter sent. That week, he'd tacked a note at the post outside the Dry Hollow General Store, handwritten, neat, and simple. Farmhand needed, room and food provided, fair pay. Inquire at Rowe Ranch. He had not expected much. Most folks were headed west for gold or south for cattle trails. Few were looking to shovel dung in Wyoming snow. On the ride back from town, Randy had spotted a girl, thin, young, maybe 19, sitting on the stoop outside the bakery. She wore no shoes. Her feet were wrapped in burlap and twine. Her coat looked like it had come off a dead man. She said nothing. Her chin stayed low, her eyes fixed on the dirt. But when he passed, she looked up. Just for a second. Something in her eyes, blue-gray like thawing lake water, stopped him cold. There was nothing in them. No beg, no fear, no hope. Just silence. He rode on. That night, the wind howled harder. Snow slapped the windows like someone knocking. Randy sat at the kitchen table, staring at the fire, holding an old handkerchief between his fingers. His wife had embroidered it with forget-me-nots. It had outlived her. He kept it in the chest pocket of his coat, close to his heart. Always had. He had not meant to think of the girl again. Yet hours later, as he brushed down the horses in the barn, her image returned, barefoot and still. It stayed with him through supper and into sleep. A day passed. Then two. The sky darkened. On the third evening, snow began to fall in thick, silent flurries, cloaking the land in a slow-moving shroud. He was carrying a bale of hay toward the barn when he heard it. A knock. Faint. Almost nothing. Then again. He opened the barn door. There she stood. The girl. Wrapped in the same coat. Eyes level now. Wet hair clinging to her cheeks. Her feet, still bare beneath the twine and rags, were turning red from cold. "I saw your note," she said, voice raw. "I can muck stalls, saddle a horse. I do not steal. I do not lie. Just need food and a place to sleep." Randy stared at her. She stood straighter, defiant despite the trembling in her limbs. "My name's Denise." He said nothing at first. The snow swirled around them. "Come inside," he finally said, stepping aside, "before your feet freeze solid." And that was how she arrived, uninvited, unshod, and unforgettable. The morning after she arrived, Denise was already outside before Randy had stepped out of the house. A soft gray haze hung in the cold air. Snow still blanketed the earth, though the barn had kept her dry through the night. She had slept in a pile of straw next to the youngest mare, curled like something small and breakable. Randy found her hauling water from the pump with both hands, sleeves rolled up, face pale and raw from the wind. "You do not need to do that," he said flatly. She glanced at him but did not stop. "I said I work," she replied. "I mean to keep the bargain." He gave a short nod and walked off. He had not planned on letting her stay more than a day, just long enough for the storm to pass. But she said nothing more about leaving, and he never told her to go. She moved quietly, with a kind of precise economy. She never wandered the house. She never asked questions. When Randy brought her a bowl of stew that first evening, she took it with both hands and whispered, "Thank you," like someone who had not said the words in years. He let her keep sleeping in the barn. She never complained. At dawn, he always found the stalls cleaned, the buckets filled, the harnesses lined up neat. He noticed, too, that the saddle on his black gelding, one he had been meaning to repair for a month, had been restitched in the back corner with tight, even thread. Denise never offered much about her past, not even when he asked. Once she said simply, "I have done harder work than this." Another time, when he found her barefoot again in the snow outside the barn, he scolded her, gruff, more worried than angry. "You trying to lose your toes?" She shrugged, brushing straw from her skirt. "Never had shoes that fit. I move better without." By the third day, she had made herself small but useful. She kept to herself, but brought warm water into the house when she saw the fire had gone out. She did not speak unless spoken to, but her eyes noticed everything. Randy began to leave small tasks undone just to see if she would catch them. She always did. He found himself watching her more than he meant to. The way her fingers moved when she twisted rope, how she paused before opening a door as if expecting something bad behind it. There was a softness in her when she thought no one was looking, when she knelt to pet the dogs, or stood still at twilight staring into the hills. Still, Randy remained distant. Not unfriendly, but not open either. A man who had buried his heart deep beneath the prairie dirt could not dig it up so quickly. Yet something about her presence unsettled the silence that had ruled his life for too long. Then, one late afternoon, he caught her doing something that stopped him cold. The light was fading, snowflakes just beginning to fall again. Randy entered the barn quietly, meaning to fetch a lantern. What he saw made him freeze in the doorway. Denise sat on a bale of hay, needle and thread in hand. She had his old coat laid across her lap, the one with the torn cuff and worn elbows. Carefully, gently, she was stitching the fabric closed, using dark thread and deliberate movements. But the thread was not ordinary. It was a strip torn from her own dress. He saw the edge, frayed, soft gray cotton. The hem of her skirt hung uneven now, and her knees were red from exposure. She did not see him watching. Her lips moved silently, perhaps whispering to herself, perhaps praying. Her eyes were focused. It was not the action of someone seeking favor. It was the quiet act of someone trying to give back what little they had. Randy said nothing. He stepped back out of the barn and let the door close softly behind him. That night, when she came into the house to refill the wood bin, she found the stove in the storeroom already glowing. A thick blanket lay folded on a chair beside it, and, without a word, he nodded toward the chair. "Sleep here tonight?" he said. "Barn's too cold." Denise looked at him, then at the fire, then at the blanket. Her eyes shimmered, but she did not cry. She simply nodded. "Thank you." Randy did not respond. He turned away and walked back to the kitchen. But that night, he lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint crackle of fire through the walls, and for the first time in years, did not feel entirely alone. The storeroom was small and smelled faintly of cedar and old wool, but for Denise it was more than a room. It was the first space in her life with a door that closed and a lock that worked from the inside. There was a cot against the wall with a clean quilt folded atop it. A single oil lamp hung from a hook, and beside it a shelf with a mug and tin basin. No one had told her to move in, but when she came in that evening and found her few things already folded in the corner, she understood. She slept that night like she had not slept in years, without her boots tied to her ankles, without her hand gripping a knife under her blanket, just sleep. The days turned a little warmer, though the air still bit when the wind picked up. Randy began to let her ride. At first he walked beside the horse, holding the reins as she sat awkwardly atop the saddle. She wobbled, then slid, landing in a tangle of limbs and a yelp into the dry hay. Randy turned, expecting a groan, but what came was a laugh. Light, bright, it startled them both. Denise rolled over on her back, still giggling, the ends of her hair dusted with straw. "I reckon I am no rider," she said through her grin. Randy chuckled before he could stop himself. It felt like his own voice had not laughed in 100 years. They tried again, and again. By the 5th time, she was riding on her own in slow, careful circles, her back straighter, her eyes shining with pride. One evening, as they cleaned fish by the pump, Denise asked if she could try baking something. Randy shrugged. "Ain't had a decent biscuit in years," he said. The kitchen smelled of cornmeal and salt fat that night. The biscuits were uneven, slightly burnt, but when he took a bite, Randy paused, then reached for another. Denise leaned forward, watching him. "Well?" she asked. He swallowed. "Better than anything I have cooked." Her smile lingered all through supper. He did not tell her that he had not eaten like that since his wife died. The rhythm of the days shifted. Denise kept the chores, but now Randy slowed down to show her tricks with the horses, how to spot illness early, how to mend wire fencing without needing to replace the whole line. She listened with the quiet focus of someone who knew how to memorize survival. There were still no questions. Not from her, not from him. But the silence between them changed. It grew warmer, softer. Then came the night the sky cracked open. The wind picked up just after sundown, carrying the smell of ice. By midnight, the barn door slammed so hard it woke them both. Randy grabbed his coat, but Denise was already outside. The mare had gone into labor early. The foal was stuck, legs bent awkward. Randy reached her just as she knelt down, bare arms working under the mare's belly. "She is breathing wrong," Denise muttered. "She is straining." "Let me," he began, but she shook her head. "I can do it," she said. "Just hold the lantern." He held the light. She worked with trembling hands, whispering something low and steady to the mare. Finally, the foal slipped free, slick and shivering. Denise pulled the newborn close, wiping it clean with a scrap of cloth. She cradled it like a child. The mare nickered weakly. Denise leaned her forehead against the horse's flank, eyes closed. Randy said nothing, he only watched. The next morning, the sun broke through frost-covered glass. Denise woke to the smell of firewood already burning in the stove beside her cot. When she opened the door to the hallway, she nearly tripped. A pair of boots sat neatly outside her room. Not just any boots. Handmade, stitched from real hide. The soles were lined with wool, and they were small, fitted for her feet. She stared at them for a long time before kneeling down. One hand reached out, trembling slightly. She ran her fingers along the seams. Then, slowly, she brought her hand to her chest, pressed it flat against the place where her heart beat. No one had ever made anything for her before. Not like this. Not out of care, not out of gentleness. Denise did not try them on. Not yet. She picked them up, walked back inside, and placed them carefully beneath her cot, where she could see them every night before she slept. The wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere out on the range a coyote howled, long and hollow. Inside, the fire burned low, casting flickering shadows on the wooden walls. It was near midnight when Randy stirred in his bed, half awake, unsure what had pulled him from sleep. Then he heard it. A muffled cry. Not loud, but sharp, like someone had been wounded in their sleep. He grabbed his coat and stepped into the hallway. The light under Denise's door was gone, but the cry came again, quieter this time. He opened the door gently. She sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around them, trembling. Her blanket was discarded nearby, tangled like she had fought it. Her shirt hung loose, and as she shifted to face him, the lamp he held cast its glow across her back. A jagged scar ran from her left shoulder down to her spine, long, pale, and rough, old, but not forgotten. She turned quickly, startled. Her breath came in quick bursts, like she had been running in a dream. "I'm fine," she whispered. Randy did not move. His voice came quiet. "What happened to you?" Denise hesitated. Then, as if the weight of silence had finally pressed too long, she spoke. "My mother was Apache. My father was Mexican. They met when she was being pushed off her land. He worked the railroads, came north. They had nothing, but they tried to build a life in the shadows. They were caught. Father got hanged for stealing a mule he never touched. Mother, they sent her south. I never saw her again. She stared into the corner of the room. Her voice had gone flat. I got sold to a rancher in Utah, white man. Said I could cook and clean and stay in the barn. I was 12. By 16, I knew better. He whipped me once for dropping a plate. That, she nodded at the scar, was the second time. Randy's jaw tightened. I played dead during a fire, she continued. Rolled under the boards, let the smoke blacken my face. They thought I burned. I walked 3 days barefoot before I begged for bread again. She looked up then, meeting his eyes. My name ain't Denise. I do not remember my first one. The last person who called me anything kind died too soon. The silence that followed was deep and wide. Randy did not ask anything else. He stepped back without a word and closed the door softly behind him. The next morning, he went into the old shed near the corral. There, under a tarp, lay a bundle of thick oak planks, wood he had never touched since that spring 4 years ago when he had planned to build a cradle. For a child who had not survived the birth, for a future that had vanished before it began. He worked through the day, saying little. By sunset, a frame stood in the corner of Denise's room, heavy, sanded smooth, sturdy as the earth itself. A real bed, not a cot, not a pile of hay, a bed, made by a man's hands for someone he meant to protect. That night, as she stood staring at it, Randy stood in the doorway, arms folded. It won't break, he said. Not ever. She nodded, speechless. Then, after a long pause, she stepped forward, reached out. Randy took her hand gently in his, calloused fingers brushing over hers. He did not speak. He did not need to. His grip tightened, not rough, but firm. A promise, not a question. A weight, not a comfort. You do not have to run any more. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing dirt roads and muddy hoofprints that led in and out of town. With spring's approach came longer daylight, and, along with it, tongues loosened by too much time and too little business. At first, it was just glances, a few men tipping their hats with smirks that did not reach their eyes. A pair of women who used to nod politely now turned their backs as Randy passed through the general store. One morning at the feed shop, the clerk tossed a sack of oats down and muttered under his breath, "Shame. What kind of girl a man brings into his house these days?" Randy's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. It did not take long for the talk to spread. Folks whispered of the girl in his barn, called her half-blood, wild blood, Apache whore. Some called Randy soft, others godless. But the worst called her a possession, something he had bought, not saved. Denise stayed on the ranch, never asking to go into town. She sensed the shift. She could feel it in how the dogs barked harder when riders passed too close, how the mail came slower, and how Randy's voice, already quiet, had grown tighter around the edges. Then, one Tuesday near dusk, a rider approached, while Randy was fixing a fence post along the creek near the main road. The man dismounted with a practiced swing and leaned against the water trough like it belonged to him. "Well, I will be damned," he said, spitting to the side. "Thought you looked familiar?" Randy eyed him. Dusty boots, long coat, battered hat pulled low, but Randy knew the kind. Ranch hand, trail trash, a man who lived too long by the whip and too little by his conscience. "You a good—" "I ain't in the mood," Randy said. The man grinned. "She yours now? Little one with the mouth shut tight and them dark eyes? I remember that girl. Quiet, but not dumb. Took a beating better than most." Randy stood. The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "She ran off, you know. Belongs to a ranch 3 counties over. They got claim on her. Property papers and all. Hell, she probably told you a sob story, they always do. But she's mine to collect." Randy did not blink. "She ain't for sale." The man shrugged. That is not your choice. And then, in a single, swift motion, Randy's fist connected with the man's jaw. There was a sickening crunch, a snap of bone and cartilage. Blood sprayed across the wood of the trough. The man stumbled back, groaning, crumpling to his knees. Randy stepped forward, fists still clenched. "She belongs here," he said coldly, standing over him. "And you do not have enough land to bury your body, if I ever see you again." The man looked up, blood dripping from his nose, then scrambled to his feet and staggered toward his horse. He did not mount clean. He rode off, hunched, his face a mess of red and dust. 2 days later, a deputy from town arrived on the ranch. "You know who he was?" the deputy asked, stepping off his horse. "He is claiming you assaulted him." Randy did not deny it. "He threatened someone under my roof." The deputy looked uneasy. "There is talk you are harboring someone without papers. A girl. No records, no name, no right to be here. Might be best for both of you if she moved on." Randy stared long and hard. "She is not going anywhere," he said. The deputy sighed, scratched his neck. "Well then, do not give them another excuse." He left without handing over a warrant. That night, Randy walked into the kitchen, sat across from Denise, and poured himself a cup of coffee. "I reckon there might be trouble," he said. Denise did not flinch. "There always was," she said softly. "You just didn't see it until now." The frost had returned early, creeping over windows and stiffening the earth. Denise stood near the barn fence at sunrise, arms crossed tightly, eyes locked on the far hills. She had not slept. Neither had Randy. She had been quiet for days. Too quiet. No humming in the kitchen. No laughter in the barn. The firewood still got chopped. The animals still fed. But she moved like someone already halfway gone. Randy knew the signs. He had seen them once in his wife, just before she told him she was afraid she would not make it through the winter. That same stillness. That same resignation. When Denise came into the house that morning, she did not sit. She stood by the door, coat in her hands, eyes dry but swollen. "I need to leave." Randy set down his coffee slowly. "No, you don't." "Yes," she said, barely above a whisper. "I can't have you lose this place. Not for me. They're already watching. They will find a way to take it from you. I don't want to be the reason." "You are not the reason for anything wrong here," Randy said. "You don't get to decide that," she replied, eyes glistening. "I walked into your life barefoot. People see me and they see a problem you didn't ask for. I don't give a damn what people see. But I do." Randy stood, fists clenched at his sides. "So what? You walk out in the cold again? Where to this time? You think I sleep better not knowing if you're dead in a ditch somewhere?" "I'd rather be nowhere than be what ruins you," she said. The silence that followed cut like ice. Randy walked past her, out to the small storage trunk near the door. He opened it and pulled out a worn leather saddlebag. Inside, he placed a wrapped loaf of cornbread, a tin of dried meat, and a pouch of coins, what little spare he had. Then, without looking at her, he reached into his coat pocket and took out the handkerchief. White, embroidered with faded blue forget-me-nots. His wife had sewn it the year before she died. He folded it once, then again, and tucked it into the bag. He handed it to Denise. She stared at the bundle like it weighed more than a horse saddle. Her hand reached out slowly, fingers brushing the leather. Then her breath broke. Tears slipped down her cheeks, hot and silent. She did not say thank you. She did not need to. She turned and walked out, without looking back. That night, Randy sat in the kitchen with the lamp burning low. He did not eat, did not drink. The wall seemed to groan louder without her footsteps moving across the floorboards. Sometime near midnight the snow began again. Thick, soundless flakes drifted past the window. Randy rose from his chair, stepped into his boots, and walked out to the barn. He stood there in the cold, leaning against the stall post, watching the gate where she had disappeared. He stayed all night. By morning, the sun rose pale and uncertain. By the time ancillary took off, Inside the storeroom, the bed lay, untouched. The fire in the stove had long gone out. But near the door, just where he had left them, the boots he made for her were still there. Still warm. The snow came early that year, fierce and unrelenting. It buried the hills, froze the troughs, turned the earth hard as iron. The ranch, once humming with quiet routine, fell into disrepair. Randy moved through it like a ghost. He no longer spoke to the animals. He let the hay run low. The fence on the south ridge leaned for days before he noticed, and even then he only stared at it, then turned away. Horses fell sick. The barn roof leaked. He stopped patching it. He ate little, slept less. The fire in the stove barely lasted through the night. He told himself she had made her choice, that she was safer wherever she had gone. But the silence she left behind was not the silence of peace. It was hollow, dead. Some nights he sat outside on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind move across the frozen pasture, wondering if maybe she had never existed at all. Then, one afternoon, gray, cold, brittle, he heard it. 3 knocks. Soft, barely audible over the creak of the windmill. He rose from his chair, heart thudding too fast, crossed the floor in 3 long strides, and opened the door. There she was. Denise. Hair wind-blown, eyes rimmed with red, lips cracked. Her hands were bare, fingers red and stiff from cold. Her coat was the same one she had arrived in the first time, and her feet, wrapped in nothing but linen and twine. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words faltered. "I tried," she said, voice shaking. "I went south. I got work in a kitchen 2 counties over, but every night I looked at the floor and wished it were this one. I tried to be nobody, tried to forget, but I couldn't, because no one called me by my name like you did." She stepped forward, faltering on one foot. He reached out instinctively. "I don't know who I am," she whispered, "but I know I'm nothing if I'm not here." The wind blew through them, sharp and endless. Randy did not speak. He just moved, gathered her up into his arms and carried her inside. He took her to the barn first, not to hide her but because it had been her place, the only place that had ever been hers. He laid her down gently on the hay and wrapped her feet in cloth, then fetched water and stoked the stove. The horses stirred, but made no noise. The barn, cold as it was, held more warmth now than the house had in weeks. When her hands stopped shaking, she looked at him. "I didn't want to bring pain to your door," she said, "but walking away from you was the worst kind of pain I ever felt." Randy knelt beside her, took her hands in his, rough against rough, warmth meeting numbness. He did not say anything. Instead, he leaned forward, pressed his lips gently to her forehead. It was not a kiss of desire. It was something older, something deeper, like 2 roots finding each other beneath frozen soil. For the first time since his wife died, Randy let go of the past, not by forgetting it, but by choosing not to live inside it. He held her close, arms around her like a shield. Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside that barn, beneath beams they had repaired together, among the beasts they had fed together, something warm finally returned. The thaw came late that year, but it came. The rivers cracked open like veins beneath the hills, and green finally pushed through the frost. With spring arrived a reckoning, and Randy Rowe, for the first time in years, rode into town with purpose in his eyes and Denise by his side. She wore the boots he made for her. They walked straight into the legal office, dust still clinging to their coats, and Randy set his hand flat on the clerk's desk. "We're here to be married," he said. The clerk blinked, glanced at Denise, then at Randy. "Full name?" Randy looked at her. She nodded. "Denise Rowe," he said. There was a pause. Then the scratching of a pen. The papers were signed, the seal pressed down with a heavy thump. By sundown, word had spread like wildfire. The same mouths that once whispered about the wild girl in the barn now stammered behind closed doors. Some shook their heads. Others said Randy had lost his mind, but he never once lowered his eyes when they passed him on the street. And she never once dropped his hand. It was not long before the man who once laid claim to her, the one Randy bloodied at the water trough, was charged in a neighboring county with a string of offenses. The court dismissed his claim to any ownership. With the help of a lawyer paid by the sale of Randy's north pasture, Denise's name became legal, her status untouchable. The town still gossiped, of course, but gossip only works when the people it aims to shame look away. Randy never looked away, and Denise no longer walked with her shoulders drawn up. On a Sunday morning, with no invitation sent and no church bells rung, they walked into the field where wildflowers had overtaken what was once a plot Randy had cleared in his grief. He had meant to bury himself in that field, once. Now, it would become something else. He wore the same coat he had worn for years, stitched and mended by her hands. She wore a plain white dress with a hem she had sewn herself, no lace, no veil, just linen, the color of sky before a storm. She walked barefoot through the flowers, each step careful, reverent. Around her, yellow and purple blooms bent in the wind. Randy stood waiting beneath a crooked cottonwood, his old dog beside him, the one that had snarled at everyone, except her. When she reached him, he took both her hands in his. "I have no ring," he said quietly. "I never needed one," she replied. There were no vows read aloud, no audience but the earth, just a promise in the way they stood, still, firm, hand in hand. Afterward, they sat in the field and shared bread and apples, laughing at nothing and everything. That night, Denise stood on the porch, watching the last light fade from the hills. Randy came up behind her, slipped his arm around her waist. "You warm enough?" he asked. She leaned into him. "I'm home," she said. A man who had lost everything. A girl who came with nothing but bare feet and silence. But from two hearts scarred by fire and frost, they built a home, a life, and the only thing no one could ever take, love. And that's the story of Randy and Denise, two souls the world nearly buried, who chose each other before the world could say no. If this tale stirred something in your heart, if you felt the snow, the silence, the slow-burning love that defied shame and winter alike, then this is only the beginning. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories to hear more unforgettable romances from the untamed frontier. Stories where bullets missed, but hearts didn't. Where the lonely found love in places no one thought to look. Tap that bell, join our campfire, and remember, love, like the land, always finds a way.